hold hands and close your eyes. It's midnight, and you're listening to the Ghost Story Guys. Welcome to the Ghost Story Guys. I'm Brennan Storr.
I'm Kev Eustace. I'm stepping in for Paul because he's unfortunately suffering from the Rona.
And this is the show where we talk about spooks, specters, and all the other things watching us from the shadows beyond the campfire. Some conversations only make sense after the sun has set, and this is most definitely one. Thanks for tuning in. This is episode number 127, and we're coming to you from that tiny mountain cabin you dream about, but can never quite reach. How are you, Kev?
Well, I'm doing very well, thanks, Brennan. Feel like I'm jumping in someone's grave. Well, he's not dead yet. Hopefully he won't. Bloody hell, that was the wrong thing to start with, wasn't it? But sorry, Paul. But Paul's unfortunately been struck down, hasn't he? So very last minute, jumping in to try and add a little bit of whatever nonsense it can provide.
I deeply appreciate it. Yeah, Paul got in touch with me, I think it was yesterday, and said that he had, and I kind of had a feeling, so I hadn't heard from him for a few days. And I know his partner had tested positive, and then, yeah, he's not well. But I did speak to him again this morning. He said he feels like he's through the worst of it. He's just really tired.
Yeah. I mean, it's a pain. I know I tested positive on Boxing Day, and it was just a heavy cold for me. But literally, as I thought I was getting to the end of it, and my partner, Becca, had avoided it. She then tested positive on the last day of my isolation. So now we're in another bank of isolation with her. So yeah, it's a nightmare.
Oh, brutal. So yeah, Paul, get better soon. I'm sure he'll be back next episode for A Haunting in Brooklyn will be that episode. But that's
very good. Yeah, get well soon, Paul. And for any Paul fans out there, you'll be saddened to know that I do not have the extensive knowledge of the paranormal that Paul has. So you're stepping down a gear on this episode, I believe. So No, are you kidding? We already managed to work a sly Paul is dead reference in here. You're throwing out deep cut Beatles jokes without even realizing it, man. This is it, yeah. This is what you get for having a Scouser on the show.
Well, we work with Luke. It's fine. We're inoculated against that particular strain. So on this episode, instead of doing our usual format, what we're going to do is I'm going to tell my own personal story, which is kind of paranormal, but also just fucking weird. And it's a story of my kind of relationship with the state of Pennsylvania. And if you've been listening to the show for a while, you'll know I've got this odd connection to the place, and it keeps kind of popping back up. It's one of those things that just sort of comes into my life and then goes again. And I don't think it has a real point necessarily, but it's always weird and interesting when it does kind of make an appearance. And so previously, obviously I've spoken about this on a handful of shows, the Pittsburgh episode, the Centralia episode, but for patrons last year, I did an episode called Pennsylvania Wants Me. It was an episode of the Sunken Library. And that is that is a version of what you're going to be hearing. That patrons got a more expanded version of that, obviously.
To be honest, when you suggested how you were going to do this episode, it sounded great from my perspective. One, because we don't have to do much prep for it, obviously, because I'm basically here as a color commentator to throw in shouts as you speak. But also, like I was saying earlier, when I'm doing the stories on my shows, I don't read them prior so that I can give a genuine reaction. And that's what I'm doing with this. So I will, because I am a patron of yours, so I no doubt will have heard the story from last year, but I'm intrigued. I feel like basically a kid in school at the minute. I'm going to be told a story and you're going to get a genuine reaction. So I'm excited to see where it goes.
Before we get started, though, I'm curious. Obviously, you were sick, but prior to that, has there been much paranormal goings on in your place? Because I know you've had some stuff happen in past in your apartment.
Yeah, we have, and now we've been in this flat for about 9 years now. It turns out, and the scariest part of that is the amount that we've paid in rent for someone else's mortgage. Believe me, but yeah, we've seen a few things. So we've had like red and green lights that almost like from a laser pen, and this long before we had a cat, going up the stairs and stuff. We've seen it like shining on the walls and all this carry on. We've also had like things which a rational mind could definitely say, well, that's just this or that or the other. So we have like long slat blinds that cover the patio window. And one day we were both watching TV, and it was as if somebody ran a finger right across the middle of them very slowly. And to the point where my partner doesn't believe in the paranormal. She just refuses to. And she said, there must be a mouse behind it. A mouse has ran across the skirting board or something. And so much so, I believed it because it was such a visceral thing that we both seen. And I go and get a bucket or something to catch it. And when we move it back, there's nothing there. People on the stairs is a common one. The other day, we were both watching TV and there was a noise that sounded like a set of keys had been dropped on the stairs. And we're in a duplex, so the upstairs is the living room's upstairs and the bedrooms are downstairs. And it's open plan, so the staircase is in the living room as well. Anyway, we heard this like metallic sound, like keys had been dropped on the stairs, and we both paused the like TV and looked at each other. And she was in panic because she heard it as well as I did. And we're the only two people in the house. And we go on the stairs and there's nothing there. There's no keys. There's no nothing. But it was such a genuine noise. We also get like loads of strange phenomena. Like we'll see the lid of the swing bin moving like something's just tapped it or something. But that could have been caught. But the best one was we were both talking in the kitchen once. And I had my back to the sink and she was talking to me. And as she's talking, I see her eyes just go wide. And then I start hearing the water running behind me. And it's like a lever tap to turn it on. You have to lift it up. When I turned around, the tap was still moving up. It was like being lifted.
Oh, Jesus.
And I was like, you've seen that. I've seen that. Don't know what to say. Now she puts it down to water pressure or that something must have hit it that she's forgotten about.
Swamp gas.
I'm like, no. Yeah, but it's all of this where we are is built on a literal cemetery as well, without trying to sound too cliche.
Really?
Yeah, there's a student accommodation just over the road from us. That's built on the site of the church. And this entire area is built on the old graveyard that used to be there. So it could be that, but we are 3 floors up also. So I don't know, but we certainly it's normally around this time of year. I'm not trying to preempt anything, but you'll see, Brennan, the guys at home can't see. But this is where I'll do my interviews if I ever do an interview for the show. And behind me, there's a TV.
Right.
2 times on about maybe 12 interviews that I've done with people, that TV's come on as we've been talking, and the remote control for which is currently on the couch over there.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, so a few little weird things, but nothing within the last few weeks, let's say that much.
I admire Becca's ability to sort of remain a skeptic in the face of, a tap literally turning itself on in front of you, or, these like noises happening where, clearly you should be able to see it, but can't. I admire that. That's commitment.
Well, you know what? The one thing that really, it was a very interesting, like sort of mental lesson for me, because with that tap incident, I was over the moon because I was like, you've seen it. This is proof. This is die-hard evidence now. You can't deny it. Brilliant, brilliant. Big smile on my face. And then later that night, it dawned on me, if that was real, that means that there's something in this apartment that can do what it wants, when it wants.
Oh.
And very instantly, my happiness turned into absolute fear, because I was like, I'm basically celebrating the fact there's some crazy lunatic randomly walking through the flat. So I then quickly jumped on her side and went, probably was water pressure. Yeah, we don't need to worry about it.
The episode we'll be doing next time, A Haunting in Brooklyn, it's an adaptation of a book. And, there's a few things like that in there where there's actual touch happening.
Yeah.
And of all the things that could possibly happen paranormal-wise, actually being touched seems like just about the worst thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's sentience as well, isn't it? That's a decision.
Well, that's it. Because it's one thing if you've got, a repeating thing in the house. Oh, okay, it's a spooky noise that happens. My mother works at the hospital in Revelstoke, and every night around 8:00, there's a certain part of the hospital you hear screaming.
Yeah.
And they don't know where it's coming from.
What?
Yeah. Whenever they try to record it, it doesn't happen. But yeah, there's a certain empty part of the hospital. It's a very small hospital, but that at least you think, okay, well, it's happening at the same time, more or less the same time, on the nights when it happens. So that's probably just some kind of weird repeating echo, some, great horror that is repeating itself.
Yeah.
But when you've got something, turning on the taps and checking items off your grocery list, you think, okay, no, this is another person living in my house who I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's that is the petrifying part about it as well. The scariest thing that she's kind of had is I'm a bit of a night owl like yourself, so I'll be up here in the living room maybe till about 2 o'clock most nights. And she goes to bed about maybe 10 o'clock, 10:30. So one night about midnight, I heard her say, "Stop standing out." Like, I heard this mumble. I didn't hear exactly what she said from downstairs, but she was talking quite low. Now, we've got an ensuite in the bedroom, and I just heard her voice. I thought she was talking to the cat. And then she comes to the bottom of the stairs and went, "Was you just in the bedroom then?" So I shout down, "No, why?" And she went, "Are you joking?" I said, "No, why?" She went, "I've just been in the toilet and I've just told you off for standing outside the bathroom because she doesn't like it if I stand outside the bathroom door for obvious reasons." She went, "Yes." She went, "Seriously, you haven't?" I was like, "No." She went, "I've just literally said, would you mind not standing outside the door while I'm on the toilet?" And like her heart was pounding. She was panicking. So now I said to her, "What was that then?" And, she still rationalizes it and tries to explain it away, as you do if you don't want the devil to appear. But yeah.
Well, that's a good point. At that point, it's self-preservation.
Definitely, yeah. And I'm all for it, to be honest.
Self-preservation and self-delusion is how I've made it this far in life, Kev, so I'm not going to criticize anyone else who does it.
Definitely, yeah.
All right. So, of course, this would be where we thank our patrons, and thank you, patrons. But we are going to wait until next episode to thank all our latest patrons. So if you signed up basically after December 20th, I think, you will not have had a shout out on the show yet, and that will be coming on the next episode. So we will thank you properly then. Although I'm going to play the patron sound just because I like it right now.
This one's for the patrons.
There we go. Okay. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. As we said before the break, on this episode, I'm going to be telling my kind of wild and woolly story of my history with the state of Pennsylvania. And it is, I don't know, I think it's probably a close to an hour-ish worth of story, so I think we'll have a reasonable episode. And between you and me, well, Jesus, we've spent, an hour talking off air, so I don't think the conversation is going to be a problem.
Yeah, we should be all right there, I think. I think we can chat. We'll be okay.
I think we'll be okay. So I guess I'll just start telling you the story. Although I should ask, have you been to Pennsylvania? Have you been? No,
I've never been states. I've been stateside. Okay. So I'm intrigued. I'm literally getting myself comfy now. Like as I am, you are the storyteller and I am at your disposal here. So.
All right. So basically the story starts for me with a dream. In that dream, I was flying through the air on top of something I couldn't see. And in telling the story, I've usually said I was on top of a train because that's what it felt like. And I believe that train was, I believe it was moving above or near train tracks, but I don't think I ever actually saw whatever it was carrying me. So then somehow I fell off the train, and I had this vague memory of it turning a corner quickly, but there's also this kind of little voice in me that says the place I ended up was kind of where I was meant to be, if that makes sense.
The place you ended up after falling off the train?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, even if I didn't intend to be there, if I didn't consciously know, that was meant to be my stop. So whatever the reason, I found myself in an industrial area next to train tracks. And it's even now, like, obviously memory is unreliable to begin with. And this has been probably, I want to say 8 years, if not longer, since I've had this dream. So I don't remember specifically, but I remember tall metal buildings, industrial buildings, not skyscrapers, more like steel mill type buildings, plus asphalt and dirt. And the quality of the lights, it looked like late afternoon, but there was no one around. Eventually the sun started to set, and I started to feel like I wasn't alone, that there was something there with me. And it was definitely something, not someone.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like a person, but at the same time, it didn't really feel like an animal either. Again, you're describing a memory of a dream is kind of hard anyways. And when it's something so fucking weird, it's kind of even harder to pin down. But
yeah,
that's kind of, it wasn't a person, it wasn't an animal, but it felt like I wasn't alone. And when the sun fully set and everything went dark, I remember starting to run toward the only light I could see. And it was a single naked light bulb in an alcove above a white door. And I remember getting to the door, looking through the window, and it was a reinforced safety glass. It's got the
little strips of metal. Yeah.
Yeah. And inside that room was, inside the door was either a room or a hallway with white or beige walls. That's the last thing I remember because everything went black and I started to wake up. But just before I did, I heard a male voice say, Edgley.
Edgley.
And at first I didn't think anything of it. It was just another weird dream. And to be honest, back then I didn't think much of the paranormal generally. Like I said, I'm not too sure about dates on this, but I'm still pretty sure I was squarely in my nothing is real but what I see, man phase. You know, I think with facts and logic and you must defeat me in the marketplace of ideas phase.
Fair play.
Yeah, if Reddit had been around when I was that age, I would have been fucking unbearable. So yeah, the dream kept coming back to me though. And eventually I thought, fuck it. And I looked up Edgley online. And you can imagine my surprise when it turned out to be a real place.
Okay.
It was a small town in eastern Pennsylvania across the train tracks from Levittown.
Yeah.
Train tracks that go through an industrial area. So this was interesting.
It's a bit beyond coincidence, that isn't it really?
That's kind of what I thought, yeah. And again, for someone who's not that way inclined, it was hard to believe. But I decided to look a little deeper into it. And at the time, Google Street View was pretty new. But it was, most of the U.S. had been mapped, including the road next to the train tracks in Edgley. Except, and I swear this is true, everything along that road, everything in that whole industrial area was fogged out. You could walk up and down that whole road virtually, using Google Street View.
Yeah.
And all you saw was a white fog or mist.
Due to the weather at the time or something they've put onto the map?
No idea. It could have been weather. Maybe the camera was fucky. I don't know. It was, and I haven't gone back to see because obviously with Google Street View, they kind of keep the different layers as they remap. So you can go look at the old versions of it. I haven't gone back to see if it's still there. I probably should. I just haven't taken the time, but yeah, I don't know. It could have just been a foggy day, but either way, it really kind of threw me.
Yeah.
And so Edgley now was very much on my mind. And I did actually go there in 2014, but that's getting ahead of myself a bit. So a lot of this is kind of dream based.
Yeah.
And from time to time, people will write in to tell us about dreams they have, which take them back to the same places over and over. And quite often these places don't exist.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're alternate versions of places they know, or they're composites of many places. And sometimes they're just completely invented places with bullshit names. And I've had different versions of this, I have this series of dreams where I'm walking down a beach next to a marina somewhere in the southern US. And there's a group of us who meet there and we seem to know we're dreaming because we all kind of marvel at how long the dream is held together.
Right. And do you know the people in the dream?
I can never remember faces. In the dream, we know each other, but I couldn't tell you what any of these people look like.
I mean, to be honest, just to say, I've had a similar dream about a shopping mall that I revisit.
Oh, really?
At least once every 2 years, I go to this Russian-looking, decrepit shopping mall, still with active shops in, and I know my way around it. Never seen it in waking life. I don't know where it's come from, but I go and know when I'm there, and it's about once every 2 years.
Do you remember anything about the way it looks in terms, aside from kind of Russian looking? Like, do you remember if it's multiple floors or? It's
multiple floors. It's 2 floors. It's got an escalator in the middle. It's all like grey concrete-esque. It's very, what's the right word? It's a poverty sort of mall. It's not an affluent mall.
Right.
But yeah, each time I'm there, I'm like, I'm back here. I know where things are. But
so this is going to trip you out. I also dream about going to a mall with multiple stories.
Really?
Yeah. I don't want to say a whole bunch because I don't want to influence your memory of your place. But yeah, it's 2 or 3 stories and it's not a high class mall. It's not an expensive place. It's kind of as I say, sort of a working class place where people go. But it's kind of dark.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just remembered, 2 or 3 floors. And I hadn't thought about that in years. And I don't think I've gone back there in years. But that's kind of a weird coincidence.
Yeah, that is a weird coincidence. Yeah, very much.
All right. We're learning things on the show, folks. And yeah, so with the beach dreams, one time I remember being surprised at how far down the beach we'd made it. This has only ever happened once. And I remember there's a moored yacht we'd never seen before. And all I remember of that is that it was white with a round window in one of the doors. And that's kind of all I remember. But now that I've said that, I'm actually just going to bring something up in my phone because I was contacted by a listener who had a story that was very similar.
Similar to the beach dream.
Yeah. This is from our listener, Haley, back in June of last year. She said, I too have a strange habit of stumbling across and seeking out dream locations in real life. I also have a beach dream where everyone knows they're dreaming. In mine, I don't recognize anyone. There's a beach house that we all eventually wander down the beach towards. It's nothing fancy, but it does open right onto the sand with long white curtains and a sandy wooden deck that's so polished by wind and sand that it shines. And what's really bizarre about that is I also dream of a beach house.
Wow. So
it could be total coincidence, right? I mean, it's only there are, I guess, only so many things people dream of.
Yeah. But it's interesting, yeah. She says, we all know. The strange thing about both of your experiences there is that you both say, we all know we're dreaming.
Yeah.
You know, because that's a lucid dream by definition, isn't it? And for everyone in your lucid dream, for you to be aware in a lucid dream that everyone else in that dream is also dreaming is a little bit Inception for me, but it's a very strange coincidence.
It is. Yeah, no, it is. And I'm legit fascinated by dreams. I know, a lot of people just say, oh, they're head movies. And sure, I think they are to a large degree, but I also think there's something else going on there.
Yeah, definitely.
Like I've probably talked about this on the show before, but I have these persistent dreams about being in my hometown that bear very little relation to how the place looks now. And then I happen to be in like a Heritage Revelstoke group on Facebook when someone posted a picture, and I realized that a number of the places I've been dreaming about are what the town used to look like, and they're roads that are no longer there.
Wow.
Yeah. Like there's this one hill that goes up, and in my head, it goes south of town. I saw a picture that the hill is actually the old Northern Highway.
Right.
That, used to be, before they built the Rogers Pass Highway, you used to have to go up and around the Selkirk Mountains to get to Eastern Canada. And that was like a 6-hour round trip through this really remote country. There's actually a lot of Bigfoot stories from up that area.
Yeah.
But that highway was closed in 1962 or thereabouts. I've never seen it, aside from walking on parts of it you can still find in the woods if you know where to look.
Yeah.
I've never been on it. But yeah, it turns out I was dreaming about parts of that highway.
Wow.
So who fucking knows?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I do think that when in certain stages of sleep, I do think that, personally, time becomes less of an issue. It's funny enough, coincidentally, and just very quickly, I was listening to a podcast today where they were referencing the premonitions of the Aberfan disaster in Wales. And that was the coal slurry disaster, which knocked a school out and killed over 100 kids, sadly. And the saddest part about it was one of the girls who died woke up the morning of and was crying, saying she didn't want to go to school because she'd had a dream that she was in school and it became all black. And her mum sent her to school anyway. And she died, sadly. So I do honestly think that there's a state that your mind can go into at the point of sleep or around that, wherever it is, where you do have some sort of ability to see whatever, time becomes a bit irrelevant at that point, I think.
It's one of those things, too, that makes me think that being psychic would be a curse.
Definitely, yeah.
There's that, is it a myth about Cassandra? She's cursed by the gods to see the future, but no one will believe her.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
There's this lawyer I follow on Twitter, Paul Doroshenko. He's nothing paranormal. He's just he's a lawyer, a criminal attorney who specializes in DUI law. He's got a podcast. Him and another lawyer have a podcast, which I listen to, and I follow him on Twitter because he's a really smart guy. And during early pandemic, he started making predictions about the economics of this thing.
Mm.
And he popped up a few times and said, I don't want to be that guy, but here's a retweet of something I said, and it just happened. And I thought, man, what an awful gift to be able to, in this case, he's not psychic. He's just able to understand the way systems work and kind of predict the market and stuff like that based on experience. But yeah, man, there's no version of knowing the future that I ever want to have any part of because it just sounds fucking awful.
It really does. Unless it's literally you've only got the ability to see lottery numbers or horse results, it's kind of redundant. Really is.
I knew a guy that would see partial lottery numbers all the time, but only ever partial ones, and they always turned out.
Really?
Yep, always turned out. And the ones where he would see all the numbers would always be the one where he'd like, no, that's bullshit. I'm through with this. I'm not playing it. And those numbers would come out.
That's insane. I like that.
Yeah, this Polish guy. Dom, I don't know if we haven't spoken in years. If you're listening, hope you're well.
He's probably sat in a gold castle somewhere going, I'm fine, Brennan. Get back to your poverty mall.
Yeah, exactly. So where was I? Oh, yeah. Dreams. So for years, I would dream of a school. And inside, it looked a little like my old elementary school, which is long gone. But again, it wasn't quite like that. You know, it had white walls, and it was much older, more utilitarian. And in my dreams, I would go out to recess with my friends, and we'd play Foursquare and hopscotch. And the yard where we'd play was a square bit at the back of the school, encircled on 3 sides by the schoolhouse itself. The walls were brick, and that's not at all like my elementary school. Like, they had sort of like rock facing, but not bricks. And I think bricks are not very common in Western Canada, at least not like it is on the East Coast of the US. Anyways, those dreams are always very boring. You know, just playing with my friends in the late morning, sometimes the afternoon. And that's kind of it. And that's the second of my 3 Pennsylvania dream places. And I'm going to save the third for now because I want to tell you about how I found the first 2.
Okay.
So in 2013, I got reacquainted with my friend Mike. And Mike is, he's a patron. Actually, I was just talking to him last night, and I was telling him that this is going to be coming up on the show, so he's prepared. But we met in 2007 because we were both part of the Couchsurfing network. And he came to Victoria when he was hitchhiking across the US. And we ended up getting sort of reconnecting in 2013. And we took a road trip from his place in Austin, Texas to the Grand Canyon. And then in June 2014, we took another trip, this time from Austin to Boston. Because Mike was, he had gotten into the Master's Fiction program at Boston University. Mike doesn't really believe in the paranormal, but he likes the stories. And so my job on the road trips kind of became like creepy concierge. So I would find like creepy or weird shit along the way. And so in 2014, we came to be in Edgeley.
Coincidentally, or you've routed it out?
Sort of both. Our route was going to be taking us through, he had to stop in Philadelphia to see someone.
Right.
And so that wasn't all that far away. I think we stayed in, I want to say Elizabeth, New Jersey the night before. And then from there, I think we went to Centralia, and Centralia was a trip. I felt bad going there. I felt like I was gawking at a tragedy, so we didn't stick around too long. For the listeners who haven't heard the Centralia story, it's in bonus episode number 3. And if you don't know Centralia, it's the town that has had a fire burning underneath it since sometime in the 1960s.
Oh, yes. I have heard that. That's amazing. Well, terrifying, but it's amazing.
Yeah. It's a hell of a story. There's a really great YouTube documentary. I think if you look in the show notes for bonus episode 3, I think you'll find the link there. But yeah, really, really very tragic stuff. Yeah, Edgeley was like the most important place we went because at this point I'd thought about the place for years. And so we started that morning. Oh, okay. So no, I was incorrect. We did not start in Elizabeth, New Jersey. We started that particular morning in Morgantown, West Virginia. So I think Elizabeth must be where we stayed later the next night. Anyways, not important. So we left Morgantown in the late morning, and then we headed east on Interstate 68. And we crossed into Pennsylvania just north of Hagerstown, Maryland. And from there went to Centralia. So like I said, I'm not going to get into Centralia, but from Centralia, we started heading south towards Edgeley. And I like to say that if I was making this up, this next part would come at the end because it's way more dramatic that way.
Okay.
But yeah, life doesn't give a shit about my sense of narrative. So before I get there, though, like I want to say the handful of times I've been to Pennsylvania, it feels like home to me. And I don't know why. It just does. And as we made our way towards Levittown and then Edgeley, I felt really, really at home and comfortable. And as we passed under a railway bridge near Cressona, which is another town in Pennsylvania, I got a very strong urge to take the next right. And it wasn't on our route. There was nothing that direction that we needed to see. But this voice in my head said, take the next right. And I kind of resisted it because I thought, this is stupid. We have enough driving to do as it is. But this same kind of mental voice nudged me as like to say, if you don't make that turn, you're going to be missing out on something. So took the right, and the road rose up till it was parallel with the train tracks. And we kept going that way for a few minutes. And Mike, bless him, he asked why I turned right. And I can't remember what I said, but he just went with it. He thought, well, we had this bizarre conversation in 2013 with a Waffle House waitress at midnight about the ghostly police raid that repeats itself in her apartment. So,
Wow.
he was kind of used to having these conversations. Yeah, that's a whole other story. That's
That sounds amazing. But yeah.
another day. Waffle House at midnight is a hive of scum and villainy like no other. But so we kept going next to these train tracks, and finally, if I remember right, the road got to the top of a hill, and what was on my left but a brick schoolhouse.
Wow.
And so it was summer and school was out, thank God. So I parked Mike's car in the lot, and I said, I just got to go and see something. And again, fuck knows what he thought. But I felt really strange at the time, and I can't explain it. It was like a sense of unreality came over me. And something told me I was going to find exactly what I expected to find. But the rational part of me kept saying, no, that's not possible. But I went around the back of the school, and sure enough, there was a play area surrounded on 3 sides by brick walls with a small fence at the back. And then past that fence was grass, just the way it had been in my dream.
Amazing.
And so the play area looked different. There was no hopscotch and foursquare. There were picnic tables in a small greenhouse, but it was undeniably the same place.
Yeah.
And that's it. Like, I thought, well, that's crazy. And then I took some pictures and I left. Because again, I was expecting some moment of dramatic revelation, but instead it was just like, yeah, man, the world's more complex than you think it is. Deal with it.
You know what's outstanding about that is I love what I really do like when I'm looking more and more into the weirder side of things is little things that don't seem important, like what you just said there and how you've described that sensation of being there. What did you actually just say? Where you said you felt not necessarily out of it, but you felt, what did you say?
It felt unreal.
Felt unreal. I mean, and you said that sort of as a descriptor for that experience, but I'm reading a lot of Colin Wilson at the moment, who wrote a book called The Occult in the 70s. He wrote loads of stuff, but he's a very, very clever, interesting guy. He's dead now, sadly, but one of his main things philosophical wise that he kept talking about was the thing he called the peak experience. And that's what you're describing there. And it's the moment in life that you step into something that something's more than normal, and it's that peak experience. He says, like, for example, if you can sometimes taste something and it throws you back mentally to a place and time and you can't describe it, but that experience in itself tells you there's something more than just living a mundane life. And your description there of it not seeming real seems like at that moment you were thrown into what he refers to as a peak experience, where you get basically getting a nod from God to say there's more than this.
Interesting. In a bizarre bit of synchronicity, I was in a local bookshop a couple days ago picking up a book for Paul. This because Sasquatch books are very common here and they're not so obviously over there.
Yeah.
So I will kind of do every now and again. I'll just cruise through the bookshops, the used bookshops, to see if there's any stuff. And I was picking up this one Sasquatch book, and there were fucking 2 copies of The Occult on the shelf next to it, and I had never even heard of it until you mentioned it just now.
Amazing. You know what? It's on a very quickly we'll say, because it's not on topic, but that book, the first 4 or 5 chapters of that book are a treatise on mental health, and they're not meant to be because it's about the occult. But some of the stuff, I've literally made paragraph copies from that book, type them very small and keep them in my wallet. Because,
really?
Yeah, I will give a very quick thing that he says in the book, and this is an example of how his philosophy on mental health goes. He's got this thing called a robot, and he says your robot attaches itself to you and it starts taking over the tasks that are everyday tasks like breathing and things like that. And he says, now, if one day you decide to take a different route to work to try and spruce up your life, he said, you may walk down a nice path you've never been down before. There'll be cherry blossoms in the trees and the sun will be shining, and you'll soak it all in and you'll say, this is fantastic. Why have I never walked down this route before? I'm always going to walk this route from now on. He said, but by the 6th or 7th time you walk down there, you're no longer taking that walk. The robot's doing the walk for you. Right. He says, and you lose what you think is enjoyment, but it's not. You're not losing the enjoyment. You've just allowed the robot to take over an enjoyable task. And he then talks about how you shake off the robot so you can regain the sense of wonder in the world. But honestly, the first 5 chapters, they do mention the occult, and the remainder of the book is very deep on the occult. But I've never read a book that's I thought was going to be one thing, and it's been a bit of a guide for me mental health wise. Very interesting book.
Fascinating. Well, that reminds me of Randonautica when everyone was doing that last year, and myself included, and just kind of, or maybe it was 2020. The time has lost all meaning, Kev. But like one of the cool things about Randonautica was it just would generate these random map points, and I found myself taking routes I've never thought of taking to places that it had never occurred to me to go.
Yeah,
and I started seeing parts of the city, which I frankly have developed quite an amount of resentment for. In a whole new light, because I was just looking at shit in a completely different way. And the robot thing, that resonates so hard. I got to pick up a copy of that book.
You do, mate. Honestly, the first 5 chapters, it's outstanding. It really is. It makes you realize just how important perception is in terms of your general mental health and the hacks that you can do to improve it.
I remember reading Christopher Hitchens, his biography, or his book, not No God But God. That's Reza Aslan. I can't remember. Anyways, I can't remember what his book was called, or the book I read was called. But he said the only experience he'd ever had he could describe as paranormal was when he was in a car accident, and he said that time slowed down to a crawl.
Yeah,
and he couldn't explain that. And I've been reading that, and I'm sure you've probably read this too, that they've kind of realized that memory is, instead of being video, memory is actually a series of stills. And what happens is the more familiar, like the more the robot is running things, the fewer stills it takes.
Right.
And that leads to us perceiving time as passing very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when shit is happening, when we're doing new shit and we're, as you say, it's kind of throwing off the robot, we're taking more pictures. And so we're more in the moment.
Yeah.
And that sort of, for Hitchens at least, explains why he saw so many, like why it seemed to slow down so much, because that was such a new terrifying experience. His brain was on hyper alert. Without banging on about it, but he uses an example of a guy who's very well known. I can't remember his name because I'm not into philosophy too much. But this guy, apparently, it's an extreme way of doing it, but he done Russian roulette. Oh my God.
To see if he could shake off the robot. And it turns out that it worked. He had the click and instantly he'd scared off the robot. And there's another reference of a guy who managed to avoid the firing squad, but when he was like tied up for the firing squad, he realized just how beautiful. He could hear birdsong for the first time in years. He could see certain patterns in walls and in the clouds. And he was appreciating his perception had changed because his brain, the robot had been scared off him. And he was allowed to absorb all these things again as if they were new. And it's just, it's a fascinating sort of treatise on a way that you can slap your brain into shape.
Interesting. Well, folks, it goes without saying, don't play Russian roulette.
Yeah, definitely don't.
But yeah, if you take something away from this episode, shake off the robot. If I hadn't already made the cover art, I would call this episode "Shake Off the Robot."
It sounds like a dance.
It kind of does, which I believe you can do, and I expect you to have choreographed by the time I get there.
I will.
Perfect. All right. Right. School. So one last thing on the school. On my way back to the car, I saw a plaque out front of the school with a date on it, and it said it had been erected in 2000. And so I thought, oh, okay, well, I couldn't be dreaming out a place from some past life, which had kind of crossed my mind because the school itself was only 14 years old. So off to Edgeley we went. One other sort of a side note, I had a feeling about this. So a couple of years later, I was doing some digging around online for something else, and I discovered that I found something that I guess shouldn't be a surprise. But I found out that the dedication on that school from the year 2000 was for a new part of it that had been built.
Okay.
That new part was built around a much older school, some of which was still standing. And those parts of the school that were still standing dated back to at least the 1920s.
Wow.
And that included the part from my dream.
That's impressive.
Yeah. So did I go to school there in a past life? Who fucking knows, right? Like, the thing I'm going to keep coming back to on this, as I talk about this, and I try to say this a lot just on the show generally, no one really knows.
Exactly.
No one really knows. There are no answers. So from Cressona, we went to Edgeley, and I honestly wish I had more to say about this part of the trip. Mike dropped me off and let me wander around a while, so I walked the train tracks, part of the industrial area, and just this is a PSA. I talk a lot about hanging out in industrial areas on this show, taking pictures and shit like that. Don't do it on foot, kids. Just don't. the thing I like about industrial areas, obviously they're creepy, they're empty. Yes, that is also why people who do illegal things also like them.
Yeah.
And the absolute last thing you want to be doing, especially on foot, is running across someone doing something that they intentionally went to an empty place to accomplish.
To not see someone with a camera.
Yeah, that's it. Wandering around, slack-jawed. Actually, funny enough, I'm reading a book right now called The Devil's Highway about this group of immigrants who were abandoned in the desert. One of the things they've mentioned is that there's a marshalling point that's, depending on who you ask, it's at this particular mile marker on one particular road. And it always happens, late at night on this road in the desert. And I said to Mike, the same guy I did these trips with, I said, man, it's a good thing we never traveled anywhere through southern Arizona, because him and I always traveled desert back roads at night to avoid the interstate as much as possible. And that would have been exactly our fucking luck.
I've never been in the States. And one thing that both appeals to me and terrifies the living shite out of me is the idea of driving down those desert roads with no lights, no nothing. It seems really beautiful and spooky and all that stuff, but it just takes one bad thought for me to hit a cactus and never be seen again.
Funny enough, there was a time actually I was in the desert back in 2009, and this was Joshua Tree National Park. But I was down there hiking with a buddy, and it was almost like the cactus jumped up and jabbed him in the ass. Like he wasn't anywhere far enough down we thought for it to have got him. But all of a sudden the cactus was like stuck in his ass. Okay. So now they're just coming for us.
I tell you what, Brennan, you know what? You get about you, honest to God. Every time I speak to you, you say well, I remember when we were at the northernmost part of the North Pole. And I'm like, what? You don't have to travel. I've never left Europe. But there you go.
I mean, I've never seen most of Europe, if that helps.
Neither have
I. So where was I? All right, so I'm in Edgeley. Nothing really interesting happened. No lightning bolts from the sky, no flashes of insight. Just this vague sense of familiarity. And so across the highway, there was a diner. So I went to the diner, got myself coffee and a piece of blueberry pie. And literally that's the most exciting thing that happened the whole time I was there. Nothing interesting at all happened.
Did you recognize the industrial estate?
Funny you ask, because the part I saw kind of looked familiar, but not totally.
Yeah.
Then 4 years later, our listener Stephen wrote in. And Stephen said, I don't have anything spooky to share, just a crazy coincidence. I always listen to your podcast while driving to and from work, and was amazed during your last episode when you started talking about Edgeley, as I was currently driving through it. As you were talking about the industrial complex in your dream, the Riverside Industrial Complex was directly on my left. I live in Bristol Borough, which is in the neighboring town, and pass through Edgeley daily. So during my visit, I didn't actually see the Riverside Industrial Complex because it was further down the road that common sense told me not to walk down.
Yeah.
And so after getting that message, I looked that complex up on Google, and I'm 99% sure that's where I was being chased through.
Wow.
There are several large silos rounded on top that, again, if you didn't know better, you could mistake for buildings.
Yeah.
There are offices with windows similar to what I described. I can only find a few pictures from the place available online, so I can't say for sure it's the same spot, but it felt very right. So I just didn't have all the information.
Yeah.
So I'll go now to my final dream. And my final dream it's not the final section exactly, but it's a final dream. And this dream, again, this took place before I ever thought of visiting Pennsylvania. And in the dream, I was being told about a curved section of river where the sounds of battle can sometimes be heard, despite no battle ever having taken place there, or at least not for a very long time. Also mentioned in the dream was that sometimes musket balls could be found in the tall grass, which surrounded the riverbed. And I think in the dream I went there, because I have this vague visual of tall grass. But at the same time, I was kind of being told about it. It's that weird thing in dreams where you're kind of in two places at once.
Yeah.
From there, I went to a lecture hall in the dream, and I was attending a talk by some kind of expert. She was a middle-aged African-American woman, but I don't remember what her area of expertise was. And during the Q&A period, I asked her if it was true that her university had a Mabeke machine, to which she smiled and said they did, but it wasn't used for what people seemed to think it was used for. And I have no idea what the fuck that meant. It's not a real thing.
A Mabeke machine isn't a real thing.
Not a real thing.
Right.
No.
Okay.
No, I tried Googling the machine once. The closest I came to, the closest I came to a result was an obituary for a guy named Maurice Beke. So, R.I.P. that guy.
Yeah, and his machine. But yeah.
And his machine. Yeah, his wonderful machine. I think the idea was in the dream that it was like some kind of machine that could also prove or like access the other side.
Wow. Okay.
Kind of thing, but again, it's a dream and it's a long time ago.
Yeah.
And it's not a real thing, but so that was the third dream. And then in 2016, Mike and I got together for another road trip. And this is the one I was telling you about off air. He was moving from New York to San Francisco, and I was going to help him out with driving and see some cool stuff along the way. So I was again creepy concierge, and I was looking at our route. We had to kind of go through Pennsylvania and a couple other places. And I thought, geez, I wonder if there's any stories of haunted rivers along the way. And there were. And not far from New York, actually, there was the town of Chad's Ford and the Brandywine Creek. If you want to know more about all sort of the history of the area, I'll include a Wikipedia link in the show notes. But the gist of it is that this was the location of the Battle of the Brandywine during the American Revolution. And I've got some notes here. I don't have this committed to memory, folks. I'm not that guy. I'm bad with dates. But according to Wikipedia, on September 11th, 1777, the American and British forces engaged in the largest and longest battle of the American Revolution. Almost 30,000 men fought for 11 hours, and it ended in an American defeat. And there's a lot of debate about the death toll, but it's generally agreed upon that at least 1,500 men died, and some think it was closer to 3,000.
Wow.
Either way, a lot of death happened in and around the Brandywine on that day. So in the modern era, there are local legends that say you can still hear the sounds of battle along the river and sometimes see soldiers walking along the road. It's called Creek Road now, but it also used to be called Route 100. So I said, well, this obviously has to be the first place we go, obviously.
Yeah.
And we left New York in the evening after rush hour traffic had kind of done its thing. And it took about 2.5 hours to get where we were going. And we were staying at the Center Stone Motel in Westchester, Pennsylvania. Chad's Ford was way too expensive. But before tucking in for the night, we decided to drive haunted Route 100. And fuck all happened. Talk about your anticlimax.
Yeah.
It was just so dark and winding that we didn't dare slow down because you were absolutely going to get rear-ended. As with so many things, people were much more scary than ghosts.
Yeah.
So, we drove the road. Nothing happened. We crashed out for the night. And the next morning, Mike had to get something done to the car before we went on, so we stuck around Westchester a little longer than we ordinarily would have. And once we had the car back, Mike said he wanted to check out the Brandywine River Museum of Art, because they have a large collection of paintings by the artist Andrew Wyeth, apparently. I had never heard of him, but I nodded my head and pretended like I had, because I didn't want to seem like a yokel.
And, that's what I've just done.
I love him. He's
very
great.
much, yes.
I like his third album.
Yeah, definitely.
And so the museum is along the Brandywine River and Creek Road. And so there was a faster way to get there, but I thought, I wonder. So I asked Mike, do you mind driving us back along Creek Road so we can experience the area in the daytime? He was game for it. So this was a very different experience because driving Route 100 or Creek Road or whatever in the daytime was a completely different experience. In the sunlight, you could see all the way down to the trees and tall grass, and I felt like I knew the place.
Yeah.
Like I'd been there before, and I don't mean the previous night. I mean, my rational, defeat me in the marketplace of ideas brain, it had these arguments, right? Because dipshit brain always has arguments.
Yeah.
And one of its arguments was, well, if it's all so familiar, why didn't you recognize it last night? And that's when something really, truly weird happened. Because a voice in my head, which sounded like me, but different somehow, it's like older and calmer, it piped up in my head and said, because we were here in the daytime. And the skin on the back of my neck just stood up. And I didn't really know what to think. So the car started to approach a pullout where we could pull the car over without getting clipped by someone. And so I asked Mike to pull over, which he did. And I got out of the car and I stood at the edge of the grass. It was midday. And in front of me, there was a chest-high wooden fence. And beyond that, the earth sloped away until it reached the trees. And then beyond the trees was the Brandywine River. And that same internal voice, which was like me, but older and wiser, spoke up and said, well, boys, I told you I'd make it back.
What?
Yeah. It's a little hazy as to exactly what it said, but I remember it was either told you or I said I'd make it back. Something like that. But I felt this intense sense of connection and peace. And I'm getting chills talking about it.
I am now listening to you, yeah.
So I got back in the car. We went to the art museum, and weirdly, it was like full. The parking lot was just full of people. And I just assumed these people are really cultured and they really like art.
Yeah.
But no, apparently kids go tubing down the Brandywine.
Right.
And that parking lot is where they park when put their tubes in the water.
I see.
And when I figured that out, I got really mad. And I couldn't figure out why. I was pissed about these kids being in the river. And I'm like, what? Why? Why the fuck am I mad about this? And that voice again said, we bled in that river and now they're playing in it.
What?
And this other voice popped up and said, yeah, but that was the whole point.
Oh my God. That's got a chill down my spine right there.
Like say the wording may not be 100% accurate.
Yeah, I get the gist though. Bloody hell.
But yeah, and my anger went away completely.
Oh my Christ.
And I never heard either voice again.
Like, forgive me if I'm not getting this completely right, but that almost seems, in comparison to the first dream where you dreamt of the school itself physically, and now in this one you've dreamt then of the fields, as you're saying, where there was a battle that took place. But was there anything that when you went to the fields physically that you could refer to from your dream, or was the dream just a very descriptive version of where you ended up?
Well, in the dream, the only memory I have is of actually like seeing the river and the way the road is and the way the trees are. You can't see the river unless you get out of the car and walk down the hill. And that's all, I believe it's all private property.
Yeah.
So I never actually got, aside from the part of the river behind the museum, I never actually got very close to it. And I wanted to. There was this really strong part of me that wanted to walk down the river, but we didn't have time. That was pretty much it. We did the museum. As I said, we didn't have time to walk the river, but we left. And I've never been back to that part of Pennsylvania. Not yet, at least. So,
how old were you then? How long? This 2014, did you say?
Yeah. So I was 31.
And around that age, or at any point in your life, because I've not really heard you talk about it, if so, but, would you class yourself as having some sort of sixth sense, for want of a better phrase?
Not like that. I found in my life, the handful of times I've listened to my internal voice, it's kept me out of trouble.
Yeah.
But never like that. Never like dreaming of a place and then finding it and then having like that visceral, like someone actually talking in my fucking head. Never.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah. I mean, and the interesting thing is there's two voices talking in your head. I can't get my head around it. It's terrifying. It's beautiful because this is the thing as well. What's really striking about that is that, if you were just telling me a standard ghost story about a voice in your head, and there's a difference between a gut feeling where you say, I listen to my internal voice and therefore I'm safer on the roads or whatever. There's a difference between that gut conversation and a distinct, visceral, different voice that's then having a conversation with another voice that you're not part of either, if you know what I mean. You're just kind of an observer.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's bizarre. Like I don't like to dwell much on past life shit because who knows, right?
Yeah.
And this particular part of the past life thing, because I feel like dudes have this thing where they like to say, "Oh man, I wish I could have been a soldier," like
yeah.
And that I'm not saying this is a diss to the people in the armed forces. Like it's a difficult job. It's a hard thing to be in it. We have a debt to our soldiers that I think we don't properly honor. In terms of like veteran care and stuff like that. But that's another conversation. But I think people who've never served kind of cloak themselves in that military thing as a way to sort of validate their masculinity or their sense of strength. So I don't like to say this, but I have been told by a psychic once that I was I've been a soldier in many past lives.
Yeah.
And so it's possible that that's what was happening there.
It is possible. I mean, the two sentences, the first sentence of the anger of why they're doing that, it's more that second sentence that for me makes this a paranormal experience, really. Because that second sentence is, it's not just a random, there are children in the river. That's like a beautiful sort of 2-sentence conversation completed with and that's why we done it. You know, that's why we fought so kids could play in the river. That's not something your brain just makes up. Do you know what I mean? It's
right.
Maybe I don't think it is anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, certainly it's not something I've cooked up, in other circumstances. I've never looked at kids tubing in a river and thought, God damn you, But anyway, so that's my connection to like the dreams and shit like this. And however, that is not the end of the weirdness. That stuff was like, okay, it felt like the sense of connection underneath the skin, right? Like, okay, so I'm, I just have a connection here. It's not scary. It's just kind of cool. And, as like you said, having that moment to remind you that there's more to life than I thought there was.
Yeah.
The next part starts with me reading the 4th volume of Missing 411. And that is written by, of course, by David Paulides. And I know a lot of people don't care much for Paulides or his research. And I got to say, I'm not, as a person, not a huge fan. But I do think what he's doing with the Missing 411 stuff is important.
Yeah.
And so I was reading Sobering Coincidence sometime, I think, in 2018. And the book touches on the so-called smiley face killers, which is alleged to be a group of people who abduct, torture, and then drown young men, but make the drownings appear accidental, except for the calling card, which is a smiley face graffitied somewhere near where the victim is found. And I could do a whole show on this subject because there is a lot of bullshit out there on this topic, like a lot of bullshit. If you're going to research it, folks, keep in mind the only official release on the subject is Case Studies in Drowning Forensics. It's a textbook that the investigators, Kevin Gannon, Lee Gilbertson, Anthony Duarte, and I can't remember the 4th guy, but they published that around 10 years ago. That is the only official release aside from a 6-part series they did for the Oxygen Network last year or the year before. And so it's boring because they're very cautious about how much information they release.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the authors who write about it, it's a lot of speculation, which I'm not crazy about. But these investigators, they believe that the drownings are being committed by a loosely connected organization of unidentified domestic terrorists, and that these terrorists are united by a quasi-religious ideology. And because of the way people will copycat shit, they've only ever released, like I said, a small amount of information, which includes the smiley face. Now, according to them, if you read case studies, the smiley face is only one of the symbols these guys use. They use a number of symbols to communicate, allegedly. So if you ever read anything that really, really zeroes in just on smiley faces, it's probably bullshit.
Right. Okay.
Just something to keep in mind. The FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit has evaluated the cases that these guys have put forward, and they claim there's no basis for the belief the drownings were not accidental. But if you read case studies, and I recommend you do, it's expensive, but it's worth it, there are major discrepancies in the autopsies, which are not accounted for in the FBI's report. Okay. And like I said, I would love to do a sunken library on the topic one day, but anyways, the point is that I was reading the Paulides book where he touches on some of these alleged drowning cases, and I had, okay, this sounds very, very hippie, I had a vision of sorts. And when I say vision, I mean in my mind's eye, I didn't physically see it. But what I saw was a pink building, brick, with a crumbling fence running alongside and behind it, and a stone archway over the road to my left. Behind me, there was a whitish, beigeish wall, and the road in front of me was 2-lane blacktop. There were trees to the left of the building, and somewhere behind it, I knew there was a river, and beyond that, a road or a highway. And to my right, I felt like there was a bridge. Now, as in my head, when I saw it, the sun was setting, and something about the place felt wrong. Like I felt like no one was there, but also like I wasn't alone. Yeah. Similar to what I described from my Pennsylvania dream, actually.
Yeah.
On episode 111, when Sam Sheeran was on, we talked about dangerous places that seem harmless, but that's only because you don't fully understand the rules. And this very much felt like that.
Right.
So just before it all went away, I became convinced this place was either in Maryland or Pennsylvania, but I was leaning towards Maryland. Then that was it. The vision was gone.
Yeah.
And I can't say whether it was tied to the drowned men or it was incidental, because all I knew was what I kind of, quote, saw, and that's it. But for the next couple months, I would find myself randomly firing up Google Maps and browsing through industrial sites on Maryland in the off chance I would find this place.
Yeah.
And like I said, that might seem like an odd thing to do, but because I saw a thing in my head, it must be real. But after all the shit that's happened, there's precedent, right? So.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I couldn't find it. I looked a long time, couldn't find it. And then in 2017, a friend of mine, actually, Dom, who I mentioned earlier, he introduced me to a local author who was getting his hours in to become a regression therapist. And he needed volunteers to sit for free sessions. So I thought, fuck it, why not? And so one day in April, I think it was, I went up to his house up on the Saanich Peninsula, and he regressed me. Full disclosure, I think a lot of hypnotic regression therapy is suggested by the hypnotizer.
Yeah,
I think they fish for results until they get what they want. And it does not say I don't believe in past lives, because obviously we just had this whole conversation about it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But I get what you mean, though. Yeah, a lot of it does can appear to be, subtle suggestions or Barnum statements or similar.
Yeah, that's it. And like listening to my whole recording, this guy really has a particular point of view about how the afterlife works. And so he asked a lot of leading questions. It was kind of funny because my, quote, higher self who was answering his questions was not giving him the answers he wanted to hear, which seemed to be very frustrating for him.
That's very good.
One of the things that he wanted that I could do was I could have a list of questions to ask my higher self. And what was interesting is it didn't have an answer for this question.
Your higher self didn't have an answer.
Yeah. He didn't have an answer because one of the questions was, why is Brennan so obsessed with missing people? And why has he had so many people in his life, and why has he known so many people who've gone missing? And I'm not a serial killer, to be clear. If you're a patron and you've got the Sunken Library version of this, I've actually included the audio. I'm not going to do that here. But basically, my higher self says, I don't know, and I keep trying to distract him from that subject, but he keeps going back to it. There's a place he's looking for. He thinks it's in Maryland because I've convinced him it's in Maryland. It's not. It's in Pennsylvania. There's something wrong with this place that he's trying to find. The voice uses the phrase, it's a hole in the soul. What's really interesting is at that point, this was supposed to be like an hour-long regression. And I want to say halfway through is when this subject came up. And my higher self actually says to the regressionist, he said, I don't know why, but you bringing that up is ending this session. He said, I feel myself drifting away and I don't know why. And you can hear it because my voice changes. My voice is a little bit deeper and more like kind of, I sound, someone said I sound like angry old Michael Keaton, but you can hear my normal speaking voice coming through more and more. And the whatever higher self or whatever you want to call it just says, yeah, man, I'm going and I don't know why, but it's something to do with this subject. So that was that. And like I said, the song patrons can hear the full version, but obviously there's a lot to break down there. And probably talked about this before, but I've known a lot of people who've gone missing. So this is a list that I've compiled. In 1981, my aunt's first husband disappeared in or around Jacob Clubs Lake in northern BC. He's believed to be drowned, but no body was ever recovered. In 2002, the father of a woman I was close to in elementary school disappeared just outside of the town of Salmon Arm, BC, which is maybe an hour and 15 minutes west of Revelstoke. His bicycle was found next to a river. He himself remains missing. Also in 2002, a lovely young woman named Nicole passed my family's convenience store while I was on shift. She was sweet and funny and friendly, and later that year she went missing near Prince George, BC, along what everyone will know is the Highway of Tears. In an odd coincidence, my broker was a tree planter back in those days, and he was on Nicole's crew. And so he and I have only just gotten to know each other over the last year or so, but we really bonded over our memories of her because he knew her for much longer than I did, but she was a lovely person, and she is still missing, and her disappearance has never been accounted for. In April 2010, my stepfather's grandson went missing after walking out of a family dinner in Campbell River, BC, roughly 3.5 hours north of where I am now. He was last spotted late that night near Campbell Lake by a bus driver. The driver said he appeared disoriented but declined offers of help. A massive search of the lake followed, including boats with side sonar. No trace of him was found. In July of that year, he was found floating in the water. No explanation was ever offered as to why the sonar hadn't found him before. In 2011, the father of a man I went to high school with was reported missing after leaving Kamloops, BC, which is 2.5 hours west of Revelstoke. His body was found a year later on the banks of the Fraser River. Those are the personal or quasi-personally connected ones. But then there's also the grouping of 6 missing men south of Revelstoke in 2017, only 3 of whom were ever located, all of whom drowned. But that's another story entirely. The U.S. Marine in 2008 who left his home in Pasadena, California and drove to Revelstoke with almost no baggage. He checked into a hostel, sent a postcard, and left a cryptic message on his parents' answering machine, then disappeared. His car was found in the middle of town with the keys in it. He has not been found. 2 of the 3 times I've been to New Orleans, I have bumped into someone associated with a missing persons case within 24 hours of being there. It's just a weird thing that happens.
Well, I mean, there's nothing rational about that. I can't tell you one person I know of who's gone missing.
Really?
We're similar age. Throughout, not one person do I know has gone missing and has not been found. I've had people who've went missing for a few hours and then have turned up dead. And they're just like friends of friends or whatever.
Right.
No one that I know of personally who's just fell off the face of the earth.
Oh,
so
okay.
That is, what my point is that that's beyond coincidence that you've got a list as long as your arm.
Yeah.
Staying on a paranormal slant, as you're saying this about, there seems to be a lot of those, well, a few of them which seem to be resulted in drownings or, they ended up being found in a river or whichever within Revelstoke. Is there any sort of, and I'm, no disrespect to the dead, but is there any sort of like folkloric thing around the lakes and rivers of Revelstoke that would tie into anything of that?
Let's talk off air.
Okay.
We'll talk off air. What I was getting at is, though, with all that is like I'm connected to the topic and off and on obsessed by it. Right. So, like I said, my higher self was trying to distract me from finding this place I kind of quasi saw, this pink brick building, and I didn't really go looking for it after that. I kind of thought, I might, but I didn't. However, I eventually ended up buying a copy of Case Studies in Drowning Forensics, which, like I said, it's like a $150 textbook. It's not cheap.
Yeah.
But I was reading through it, and there was one particular case where a missing man was found in a river with his body frozen solid. Like, they had to leave him at room temperature for something like 24 or 36 hours to thaw him out. Like, he was like frozen to the core.
Yeah.
And the initial investigators, and I think the behavior analysis unit, said that it was because of the cold temperatures. But that doesn't add up because obviously, even if you're in the river and you freeze, like there's temperature variation throughout the day.
Yeah.
The odds of you freezing solid all the way through are pretty low.
Yeah.
And so the investigators, they suggested that whoever had abducted this man had access to commercial freezing equipment. And the reason they said this was that the only way they thought a body could be frozen this solid was with flash freezing,
wow.
Which is something only like a commercial operator would have.
Yeah.
The moment I read that, it clicked in my head. I searched for frozen food manufacturing and Pennsylvania. And there it was. The building was red brick, not pink. Although, as a friend pointed out, I saw the building at sunset, and red bricks would look pink at sunset. Yeah. The road in front of it was 2-lane blacktop, and to the left of the building there were trees. There was no stone arch over the road, but there was a what looked like an abandoned stone homestead in those trees.
Yeah.
There was no fence, but behind the river complex, there was a river. Beyond that was a road, and right down at the right end of the street, there's a bridge.
Wow.
And across from the pink building was a white cinder block building, which would have looked off-white or beige in the sunset. And that was the Frozen Food Center.
What?
So, like I said, that was not the building I saw. That was kind of behind me.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was there. And the town was Union City, Pennsylvania. And the red brick building is what remains of the Union City Chair Company's factory, which opened in 1881 and I think closed in 2000. And since then, different companies have tried to revive manufacturing there, but I don't think it's ever really worked. And I want to say, like, just to be totally clear, I don't think there's any kind of link whatsoever between these smiley face drownings and anyone in Union City. I don't think, like, this is not my elaborate conspiracy theory. I just, I had this weird confluence of things which led me to a place, and I think that's fucking fascinating. But
it really is. I mean, none more so than that regression. The regression there, I mean, I've heard it. I don't know enough about it, but I know that there's something which is referred to as the daemon, isn't there? That not a demon, a daemon. That, people have within themselves that kind of controls the higher self, if you like. But that's one of the first times I've heard about that sort of entity coming out and literally having a face-to-face conversation with someone, if you like to say. I keep this from him, like as a, in the third person sort of thing.
Yeah. I don't know, man. It's bizarre. I mean, there is more, but this is already going to be a long episode. And also I feel like I don't want to lean too much on the drowning thing. Because again, I don't want people thinking that I'm making allegations, because I'm absolutely not.
Yeah.
But I did hire a remote viewer to give me an impression of the area. And I'll talk a little bit about that before we wind up. But so if our listeners, I'm sure by now, if you've heard the show, you'll know. But if you're not familiar with how remote viewing works, you provide the viewer with a random code that you mentally attach to the place you want them to assess. Mm-hmm. So in this case, I use the letters UCIE. And the idea is that the viewer then uses their consciousness to view the spot in question. And now I've done this. I've seen this in action. This works.
Yeah.
The U.S. government had a program doing this for 20 plus years. That's documented fact.
Yeah.
It was shuttered actually not long ago, maybe 5-10 years ago, because according to them, there were no demonstrable results. That is also not true. And I know this for a fact, that the subcommittee, or one of the members of the subcommittee that looked into this, told one of the remote viewers, I'm shutting you down because you're a witch and you're doing devil's work.
Wow.
Like that's a thing that happened, and so they cherry picked reports which showed that this never worked. And to be clear, it's not super great for if you're trying to get intelligence or something. It's it's got limited utility because there's a lot of impression involved, but it does work.
I completely believe it works. And just very quickly to touch on how believable what it is you're saying there, because it was at the Stargate program, or it had similar names or something back in the day.
Yeah, Stargate, Grill Flame. There's a couple.
Because I know that even with this UAP thing that's going on recently, where the Pentagon is saying we don't know what these things are, there's some footage of some UFOs and all that carry on. Apparently, even today, in the Senate and places such as like that, there are people within there who went against funding that UAP, whatever the acronym is for it now, for that sort of investigation, because they believed that these were demons that were coming from the sky. And these people still exist within Senate and within government in America, that they believe they don't want to give money to what they think are demons coming from the sky to do with UFO research. They're real people that exist today in 2022. So you saying that they're knocking it back because they're calling someone a witch is completely believable. So you give the code to the remote viewer.
Yeah. So I gave the code. The code was UCIE. And I said, describe the area and currents running through / beneath it, emotional and psychic. And so before I read what the points she gave back to me, I want to say most remote viewers would not do this, because they're very adamant that what they do is a science, albeit one we just don't understand yet. Yeah. So they will not give you kind of psychic impressions of an area. So I was really lucky to work with someone who would. Although, interestingly, she stopped returning my calls because of something that came up during one of these sessions. And that's another thing. I'll tell you, Kev, but I can't talk about it on the show.
Okay.
The first thing she said is, the area appears to be fairly isolated with empty buildings, concrete, and tarmac. There is a sense of isolation and something that was used in the past but is no longer functional. And of course, the Union Chair Company was once a thriving business, and it isn't anymore. There is an educational aspect to this area rather than residential. It's not very active. And now I believe there were classes being taught in the building for a period. They were trying to teach people to woodwork. Then she said, help is again asked. And this is something we never solved. I hired her to view 3 locations. This happened in 2 of the 3 locations we viewed. We never understood what help, we never understood who or what was asking for help.
Yeah.
And like I said, remote viewers are not psychics. So I was kind of asking her to do something outside of her usual purview. So this may just be noise.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
But my next question was, do you see anything unusual beneath the ground? And she said, I perceive a pilot, there are troops and military activity, and the area served a planning function. So this is where I have to admit some laziness and bad planning, because I have been in contact with the Union City Historical Society over the phone and asking about whether or not troops were ever quartered there. And they don't believe troops were ever quartered there, but the town is really close to Lake Erie. And the Battle of Lake Erie was fought in 1812, so it's likely that troops passed through.
Yeah.
And so it's probably also very likely that there was some kind of planning happening there.
Mm-hmm.
But this next one is what really got me. She said there was a large person, a giant, connected with this area. Now, that sounds, ooh, it's not, but it's funny because you could take it and run with it.
Yeah.
But the obvious answer is that up until like the 60s or 70s, there was a giant chair standing at the entrance to town.
Really? That's interesting.
So when I spoke to the remote viewer, like I kind of said, there was this there. Because I eventually told her at the end of the session, this is this is what you're reviewing.
Yeah.
Because they like to have that confirmation if possible to so they know afterwards. But yeah, so she said, no, it was the chair. There's no giants. It was the chair. But she said Ohio was mentioned, which is fascinating because Erie County, Pennsylvania borders Ohio.
Hmm.
She said something united or connected. I mean, it's fucking Union City.
Yeah.
And there was a bar nearby. And it is true. I had to dig a little bit, but the Crooked Street Inn used to be on the same street as the Union Chair Factory.
Wow.
There was a bunch of like stray information and stuff that, again, if you listen to the Sunken Library version, listeners, you'll hear it. I'm not going to include it here because it doesn't lead anywhere. It's just kind of interesting. And that's pretty much my Pennsylvania story, with a little bit at the end. But that after hiring that remote viewer, nothing else happened. And I kind of drifted away from the topic. It was also that year that the business I'd invested in collapsed. And so I was out a lot of money and I was very distracted. In 2019, a close friend of mine was diagnosed with cancer. One of my cousins committed suicide and I lost 2 different jobs. So like I was not thinking about this stuff at all.
Yeah.
And then of course 2020 happened. And so Pennsylvania was not on my mind. But there have been a couple developments. The first thing was just a feeling. But it was a significant one because I hadn't experienced it in a long time. And I guess I should say I'm not a true crime enthusiast. I'm really not. But the missing person thing always gets me.
Yeah.
But I shouldn't say always. It's not every case. There's just some cases for some reason those ones pique my interest. And I don't know. I couldn't tell you why, but they do. And when that happens, I get the sensation inside me like I'm turning into the wind. If that makes sense. It's like there's a cool current blowing through me.
Mm.
And last year, in late spring, maybe early summer, I felt that for the first time in a long time. Like it just out of nowhere. And I thought, oh, okay. And I guess this was why, because a few days later, I was contacted via email by a new listener. And that listener said, sorry, pretty late to the game. I have recently been binge listening to your podcast. I was listening to the third bonus where you were talking about your Pennsylvania connection. As I was listening, I was thinking of my own connection to someplace I can only describe as the Bluff. So you can imagine my shock when I listened to the Ghost in the Machine episode and heard the word bluff. And of course, that was one of those bizarre audio anomalies we could never explain.
Yeah.
I was hoping maybe you had more clues to the word showing up. I know it is probably a long shot, but it seems too specific of a coincidence. I have searched for a long time like you did for your Pennsylvania connection, but have hit brick walls everywhere. And so this person was asking us for if we could help connect them or provide any information. We put it out to our listeners and we found some places that were maybe similar, but nothing that was like a one-to-one match.
Yeah.
But what was interesting is obviously they were inspired to ask us that by the Centralia episode. And that episode very rarely gets downloaded.
Mm.
Like one of the reasons we stopped doing bonus shows was because people just didn't really listen to them.
Yeah.
And so we just stopped. And so for someone to bring up that particular bonus episode, like days after I had that feeling like shit's coming back around again, seemed noteworthy. And then 5 days later, I was contacted by another listener. And this is a listener who'd been with us for a while. And she said, I just revisited the Centralia episode. You delve into your connection to Pennsylvania. I live in a small town close to Union City. I did not recall your reading coming out with the phrase hole in the soul, but from what I was told about UC growing up, that describes it well. And she includes a joke that I'm not going to say here because, the Union City has suffered enough. But yeah, she's basically confirming that she said, it's an economically depressed place.
Mm.
And there's actually a really interesting article in the Atlantic about Union City and the surrounding area. And I in the Sunken Library, I really get into that because there's a political connection there that I'm very interested in. But suffice it to say, it's just like a lot of small towns, they've had a hard road.
Yeah.
It's tough. in the modern era. And that was kind of it for the time being. It finishes on sort of a limp note, but I think that's the way of this shit in real life.
Yeah,
there are no easy answers. There's no Hollywood revelation. It's just like, oh shit, okay, and I guess now we wait to see what comes next.
Yeah, all of the more realistic things seem to go with a whimper, don't they? They don't go out with a bang or with a final rubber stamp. They tail off, and then, like you've just experienced when you got that feeling last year, they can come back on you at any point. But it's interesting that you associate that feeling of, as you said, turn into the wind. It's really interesting that when you feel that, you can associate it immediately with Philadelphia, Pittsburgh. Sorry, where is it? I've got lost my remember that.
Well, not necessarily with Pennsylvania, but that feeling specifically usually comes up when I'm looking into the missing persons thing.
Yeah. It's strange. So what do you genuinely think? If you had to have a stab in the dark, would you say, because from listening to all of that and doing what we do in terms of paranormal podcasting and listening to these, well, not these stories, but, listening to similar tales and trying to rationalize them and trying to make some sort of theoretical sense out of them, I would say if I didn't know you and I'd heard that story for the first time, I'd say, well, clearly you went missing in a past life, is what I would say. But where do you stand on why you think you get these?
I really don't know. I don't know. I know that when I went to the psychic that told me about the past life thing and the soldier thing and the bullet in the head thing, which that was a gift from Nikki. That was not something I would ordinarily choose to do. But one of the questions I asked was, what happened that day in the hospital? Because she was also giving me an option to sort of have these questions to ask the guides or higher self or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And now I didn't tell her anything about that day in the hospital. I didn't tell her anything. But people who listen to the show, you might remember when I was a very little kid, I want to say when I was maybe 4, 5, I was visiting my mother in the hospital in Revelstoke, and my family were getting ready to leave, but I wanted to stay for a couple extra minutes. So they let me stay because it was Revelstoke and there's literally, 2 working floors to the hospital. Yeah. So after I left, my grandpa had said to me, you remember how to get downstairs? So I got in the elevator and I pressed the button. And I remember when the door opened, it opened on, it looked like the lobby of the hospital, kind of, but the quality of light was like nothing I've ever seen before. It was blue. It looked like no one had been there in a very long time. Everything was covered. There was drop cloths on stuff, and it just looked dusty. And I was really scared because I didn't know what was happening. I had no idea. Because all I knew was get on the elevator, push the button for lobby. Yeah. And that'll take you down. And so I didn't know what to do. And so I stood there for a long time. And then the door closed in front of me and the door opened behind me. And my grandfather said, "Oh, there you are." And he grabbed my hand and we walked out. And I remember as we were walking out, I said to him, "Grandpa, I told him what I'd seen." And I said, "Why did that happen? Like, where did the elevator go?" And he went, "Oh," he said, well, when they built the hospital, they built a full hospital, but he said, we only have money to run half of it. So what you saw was the back half. That part's not used." And I didn't think twice about it, dude. I literally believed that until 2017. And I was actually, something I heard on the Graylian Report back when that was on. And I was evaluating an experience. I actually thought I had an experience of like a time slip kind of thing, but it turns out I was just mistaken about where I'd been. But then I remembered the hospital and I thought, fuck, I wonder what that was all about. So I talked to my mother, and as I said, my mother works in the hospital. And I said, the back half of the hospital, that's not in use, right? That was never in use. And she looked at me like I was the dumbest man alive. She said, "What?" And I said, "Yeah, like they built the front and back side of the hospital, but the back side, it was like full of stuff, but it was never staffed." She goes, "Nope, that's not a thing." She said, "The third floor is storage, but yeah, both floors are fully in use." And so then I asked her, I said, "Well, if I go down to the lobby and the back of the elevator opens as opposed to the door facing the lobby, what do I see?" And she goes, "Well, that's the hallway to the operating room." So I said, "Does it look anything like this?" And I described what I told you. And she goes, "Nope, nothing like that." "Okay. What about the basement?" And she explained the basement. She said, that's the hallway to, I think, the kitchen. She's like, nope, that's also bright and well lit and always would have been. She said, it never looked like what you're talking about. She said, there's nowhere in the hospital. She said, the elevator does not go to the third floor.
So it couldn't have been in the storage room.
Couldn't have been the storage room. So I've always been curious about that. And so I put, as I said, when I went to go see the psychic, I put on the questionnaire, what happened that day in the hospital? The psychic said to me, your grandfather's here. And I always kind of go back and forth on this stuff, but we'll say it for the sake of argument. She's like, your grandfather's here. And she says, he's asking, Brennan, do you remember when you were little and you used to slip away between dimensions?
What on earth?
Yeah.
Mate, I mean, it sounds legit. And especially if, I mean, what was your granddad like then? Was your granddad up on spooky spiritual stuff?
Not at all. No, he was or if he was, I should say we didn't talk about it, but I don't think so. He was a businessman. He liked World War II documentaries and nature shows, and that was the extent of my grandfather's interests.
Isn't that interesting, though? Isn't that really interesting? Whatever you've seen there is, it does sound like some sort of dimensional slip.
Yeah, maybe. I know there are definitely cases in Missing 411 that sound like that.
Yeah.
You know, there's that Australian woman who, like, she could hear them looking for her, but they couldn't find her.
Well, that's like a nightmare. That's literally like an actual nightmare.
Yeah.
Where I've had those nightmares, you know, where you're on one side of the street and people you want to be with are on the other side and you're screaming at them and they can't hear you and they're all looking for you. I've had those sorts of nightmares. I've
just edited out a therapy moment with Kev and I, but yeah. So
it was very good. It was very good. I'll tell you what I will say. There was something which I wanted to say a couple of times as you've been describing things, and it's for listeners, it's to add veracity and believability to the stuff Brennan's saying, and it's how you describe things. And there's two different ways that you seem to describe things, and when you're describing just a situation or scenario, you do it in a very particular way. But when you're describing things which are actual visual and visceral memories, you do it in a way that's very similar to me, which makes it more believable for me, that I know that you're talking
interesting.
From the mind. And there's a very quick paranormal type story, which I'll say because it's not changed. And this is what, and I use the descriptive techniques in a similar way. So basically, my mum died when I was 16, and but before she died, she was very into ghosts and spirits and stuff. And we used to do like spiritual games, like psychometry, for example. She'd give me a wedding ring, and I'd try and tell her where she was when she received the ring, and stuff like that. And by all accounts, was quite accurate with her. And then it became a bit of a trick. And then she passed on, sadly. Let's carry on. But then we used to go to the local off license at the bottom of the road, because the woman who worked in there, I would bunk off school and go to the off license, and she would be working there all day. And she'd sell me a quarter bottle of vodka and some Sunny Delight. And I'd sit there with her every other day, and we'd get pissed and smoke. You could smoke in the shops at the time, and it was quite a good little day. So Eileen, her name was, she's a lovely woman. But anyway, one day we get talking about this thing. I like a little bit pissed, say, I can do this psychometry thing. So she goes, oh really? She went, I've got something for you. So she comes out with this watch and passes it through the counter. And I went, oh, nice one, thank you. So I said, it doesn't always work. Let me see. So I put it in my hand and I closed my eyes. Now, normally when I would do it, it was like a bit of a parlor trick. And I'd close my eyes and I'd see something and I'd say, like, for example, I could take you on a tour around your house. Do you know what I mean? I'd be able to say, like, all right, you've got green carpet, you go up, you turn left. There's then a red carpet going into the bathroom. And normally it'd be quite accurate and people would be like, that's amazing. And be like, yeah, dead good. And normally it was all colour, it was all dead good. Anyway, I got this watch, and first thing when I closed my eyes, everything was black and white. Everything that like I could kind of see was black and white.
Interesting.
And I was in my dad's hallway, and I was pulling the flex angrily off a Hoover, the power cord off a Hoover, and looking up at the balcony and thinking, no. And I'm saying this out loud to her as I'm seeing it. I said, I don't know why I'm in my dad's, but this is what's going on. I said, okay, now I'm in like a foresty, wooded sort of area, and I'm looking out from these bushes. I said, there's a dual carriageway, and then in front of this dual carriageway, there's a red brick building with like columns on it. I said, and I can see that, and to the right of just outside these bushes is a bus stop. And I said, and then I got like pins and needles on my shoulders. I said, I'm just getting really freaky around the shoulder area. I said, and it's horrible. I said, it just feels horrible. And I passed her the watch back and opened my eyes. And when I opened my eyes, she was crying. And she said, you've just described the place where my brother hung himself with the flex from a Hoover.
Oh my God.
And I know the place. It's on the East Lancs Road. And when she told, I didn't see it as this place because I didn't ever go past it, but I've been past it since. And it's an old newspaper printing factory, and over the road, over this dual carriageway, is a bus stop, and then kind of a bushy clearing. And it was just such a strange visual. And whenever I describe that to people, and this is my point I was getting back to earlier, when I describe this to people, I do it in the more or less the exact same style as when you were describing that industrial area, when you were saying this is over here. And for those, obviously, guys, you're only doing audio, but watching Brennan doing it, his hands are going over here as he's looking into space as he's putting these places around. And I know, because that's how I do it, that you're doing it from a real place of
interesting,
an actual memory. Now, just to end that story, I can no longer do it. I stopped doing it, and then I tried about 6 years later, nothing. It was a joke, and I made an absolute arsehole of myself. But I just know that there's two different ways that you seem to describe things, and I really get invested because I know that you're talking from an actual place of genuine experience. So well done you as a storyteller is what I'm trying to say.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I mean, that's an incredible story. And I wonder if you worked at it again, if you could sort of bring that back. Because I just don't think this stuff goes away.
Yeah.
But I wonder if we had this lovely message from a patron named Jen. And Jen has been super cool. She was really helpful, especially in the first half of last year. You know, she gave me some insight and context that really kind of helped me understand what I was dealing with. But, you know, she suggested that we're all a bunch of the people who are working together, you know, and like people like you and me and Paul and Luke and Sarah, you know, and some of the other folks who we're kind of in regular touch with, we're all kind of operating along the same wavelength, and we're kind of rediscovering parts of ourselves that maybe the world sort of tried to beat out of us.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that, yeah.
So, you know, you and I were talking off air about kind of how you are now like basically a full-time podcaster.
Yeah.
And, you know, like that's it took a long time for you to be able to trust yourself to do that. But now that you're doing it, you're making it happen. And I wonder if because life does, right? You know, we were talking about having I can't remember the name of the experience that you mentioned from the occult, but this idea that these experiences that remind you there's more than what's in front of you.
The peak experience, he calls it.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds you that there's more than just the marketplace of ideas.
Yeah.
And I wonder if, you know, because life the drudgery of life just beats that out of you.
Yeah, I agree. And I do genuinely think, and I experienced like, again, a peak experience of my own when thinking about quit my job to do full-time stuff. And it was strange. I mentioned it to you prior to us starting the recording, and I am starting to get the opinion now, without sounding too the secrets about it and all that sort of nonsense, but I am starting to get the opinion that the more you reach out and try and grab life, the more life tries to reach out and grab you back. And the more you think, no, I can't, the more life says, well, no, you can't. But it's finding that balance.
Yeah, I do think to a certain degree, reality is programmable.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, obviously that's not to say that people who are suffering are somehow the cause of their own suffering. That's not what I'm saying. Because there are circumstances which are larger than all of us.
Yeah.
But I think there are certain situations where the way you approach it can dictate how you navigate out of it. Because if you just think everyone's bad, everything's bad, it's always going to be bad, it's never going to get better, that's what your experience of life is going to be. And frankly, I think that's one of the reasons everything is so fucked. I think we stopped teaching people how to hope for the future and that the future can be better. So you ask 9 people, I would say, or ask 10 people, and 9 of those people are going to tell you, yeah, man, the world sucks. It's always going to be like this. Like, that's a fucking grim way to live, but that just seems to be how we've decided to live.
Yeah.
And consequently, yeah, there's not a ton of hope. I mean, there is that movie Tomorrowland, which was not a great movie. It was like a great opening act and third act, missing completely a middle act. Yeah. But what really pissed people off about that movie is it dared suggest that constant unbridled pessimism is not going to improve anything.
Yeah.
It suggests that, man, like we're kind of like collectively, we're being influenced into our misery, and that we could influence ourselves out of it. And again, it's not easy. It's a process, and already I can hear angry messages coming in saying, "Well, you're not considering this," and please don't, because I don't care. But yeah, I think that we can, to a certain degree, program our reality, and I think we have to be so careful, and that's something I've really learned, man. Like in therapy and just in the last couple of years, if you give other people control, over your definition of yourself, it's really easy to lose control of it. Like it's really easy to lose who you are if you let someone else tell you
what you are. I agree. Just to say, I mentioned earlier that I made a note of some of the things out of the occult, and I keep it in my wallet for whenever I feel like I need to pull it out and just have a reminder of a few things. And there's a sentence here from Proust, which he uses in the book, which is quite interesting. He says, the very essence of the human problem is that we keep forgetting how delicious life can be, and we allow ourselves to slip into a state of mind where it scarcely seems worth the effort. Proust says, we deliver on life a pessimistic judgment which we suppose to be accurate, for we believe that we were taking happiness and beauty into account, whereas in fact, we'd replace them with the dark glasses, the robot synthesis of both. That's just a little snippet from the book where I think it's damn right.
Yeah.
And it is right. If you, like we were mentioning earlier about going on that walk and eventually the robot does the walk and you get bored of the walk, you then start thinking that the walk is the walk in its entirety, and it's not. It's your now new version of the walk, which is boredom. It's the mind. It's a fascinating thing, isn't it? He says Kev for the first time ever in history.
It is, though. It is. Perception is so fascinating that way, right? Because your perception, all you have of the world is your perception of it.
Yeah.
And you can argue about objective reality all day, but ultimately what we're experiencing is our subjective view of it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not one of those people who say that, we all start believing the sky is red, that the sky is suddenly going to be red. Like, I'm not that guy. Because I think tulpas are bullshit.
Yeah.
But still, like if we collectively decide, hey, you know what, we're going to be hopeful and start pushing for positive things, I think that is the difference. That's what makes the difference.
Yeah.
And I think we've been lulled through a lot of different things. And this goes with political, Brennan, which I'm not going to do. But we've been lulled into this state where we think that it's okay to be deprived of things by people who have more.
Yes. Yeah.
Like there's some kind of nobility in suffering, but the people who are telling you that are people who do not have to suffer.
Yeah.
And it really bothers me because I see so many people I love just being like, man, there's no hope. We have no power. And it's almost like they fetishize. They've reached the point where they fetishize being powerless. And it drives me fucking crazy because you're not powerless. I mean, sure, there are situations where you can't do much. Like if you're in the middle of being arrested, saying, I do not believe this to be true is not going to help you very much.
No, but there's a positive way to take everything. I mean, my dad he's not a philosophical man in any way, shape or form. He's a lovely fella, but he's not a philosophical man. But I remember when I was talking about, I don't know whether to leave my job, and normally he's very staunchly like, he's a war baby. He's like, you need a job, you need support, you need this, you need a backbone. But when I was saying about like my concerns about leaving work to try and take a chance on myself, he said, your stress levels in your current job are through the roof. And they were. He said, and that's stupid of you. He said, because if you drop dead of stress tomorrow through this job, do you know what your job will do? They'll advertise your post. And that's it. Yep. He said, and the graveyard's full of people who thought they were indispensable. I was like, fucking hell, he's so right. So yeah, you're right, Dad. I will quit the job.
That's right.
Now, give me some money.
That's not quite what nope, too late.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's like that episode of The Simpsons with Mr. Burns. I can never die.
But it's like
very fragile condition.
Yeah, one false move and you'd be dead. No, I'm immortal. Amazing.
Well, folks, that has been my story of Pennsylvania. That is the Call of Dreams. Thank you for bearing with me. I know it's a non-standard episode, but it's a fun topic, and I think we had some great conversations. So if you have dreams which have come true, or I know we've had a lot of listeners talk about this precognitive dreams, send us an email, ghoststoryguys@gmail.com. I would love to do another dream episode. We haven't done a dream episode in a very long time, and it's a subject I'm always interested in revisiting. And we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Hey there, listeners. Before you reach for that skip 15 seconds ahead button, I promise you this isn't an ad. We wanted to take a minute to talk to you about mental health. On this show, I've always tried to be as honest and open as possible about my struggles with depression and anxiety, because even though we've come a long way towards acknowledging the very real damage these things can do, there is still way too much lingering stigma about reaching out for help. And when you start to feel like there's no help, it's easy to start feeling like there's no hope. But Paul has joined me today to remind you there is always hope and there's always help.
We're not going to try and talk you out of self-harming right now, because we know that's not how it works. Instead, what we wanted to do was tell you something now and hope that should things get bad, you'll remember it and make a phone call or send a text message before you make any permanent decisions. As someone who knows all too well just how important mental health can be, it's never too late to reach out.
In Canada, the number to call is 133-456-4566. In the USA, the number to call is 1-800-273-8255.
In the UK, the number to call is 116-123 or text SHOUT, that's SHOUT, to 85258. In Australia, the number to call is 131114.
However bad shit seems, it will pass. And no matter what your brain might be telling you at any given moment, and believe me when I say I know this intimately, there are people who love you and people who care deeply about how you treat yourself. Should a time come when you find yourself despairing, please know that we've both been where you are, and there is a way back to the world. Take care. Welcome back. Thanks as always to Luke, Sarah, Anthony, and everyone else who's part of the Ghost Story Guys family. Also, and though he's not here, I always like to thank my friend and co-host, the great Paul Bestel, the paranormal Johnny Carson. He will be back in action, we're hoping, next episode, and until then, check out his podcast, Mysteries and Monsters, wherever you get your shows. You will not be disappointed. And finally, thank you, Kev Eustace, host of the Dark Paranormal, and We Need to Talk About Ghosts, my paranormal brother. Thank you for filling in and for being here.
You're very welcome. Thank you for the last minute invite. I've had a lovely chat, and it's always a pleasure, Brennan, really is. Our only issue is that we tend to go on rambles, so I leave you with a lot of editing to do, so I apologize for that.
No, I love the rambling.
I listen, obviously, big fan of the Ghost Story Guys. You and Paul have took it from strength to strength, and I know by just doing this episode, this is not your normal Ghost Stories Guys episode, so for anyone listening, Paul will be back next week, don't worry. This is just a bump in the road. And it's been an absolute pleasure. We've really hit on some very interesting topics, I do think.
Oh yeah, as I say, that's why I like tangents, because you never know where you're going to go, what you're going to learn. It's sometimes the tangents I think are more interesting than the main topic, because I think they help illustrate it in a way that you previously had not considered.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So what's coming up on Wintag and Dark Paranormal?
We need to talk about ghosts, just the general sort of stuff. If no one listens to the shows, I do too. We need to talk about ghosts, which is me sounding like this. Some people like it, some people don't. And the Dark Paranormal is more of a drama-y. They're all real stories, but they're more done in a more serious way. So depending on what your cup of tea is, you can check them out. But yeah, we've got a couple of nice listener stories on the Dark Paranormal coming out tomorrow. Oh, it won't be tomorrow, by this is out coming out on Friday. And for We Need to Talk About Ghosts, we'll just need to see what happens. We tend to not plan those ones. So,
oh, fantastic. And where can everyone find you online?
Good question. Wherever I may roam, as Metallica said. Now, if you search for, there's a We Need to Talk About Ghosts Instagram, which gets a bit of traction. Same with the Facebook. There's not much on for the Dark Paranormal. It's something with my newfound free time that I need to try and set up. But yeah.
Okay, so watch this space, and when all that stuff goes live, we'll make sure to mention it on here as well.
Oh, you beautiful man.
I have my moments. All right. And my other podcast, Largely the Truth with Brennan Story, you can find that everywhere fine podcasts live. That is a non-paranormal chat show where I talk to authors, musicians, anyone who's got something cool to say or a story worth hearing. I took a break after mid-December, but I would plan on coming back with that towards the end of January. So keep an eye out for that. I'll be going back to a bi-weekly schedule because I do not have Paul's work ethic, and having a weekly show on top of this show was too much. But yeah, so that will be coming back soon. And until then, you can check out some really great interviews. I talked to Andrea Janes, owner of Burrows of the Dead. That's New York City's best reviewed ghost tourism company. We had a fantastic conversation about ethical storytelling. And actually, if you're a patron of this show, you get an exclusive extension to that interview where we talk about Andrea's paranormal experiences. So again, you can sign up for that at patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. And I won't get into the whole list of everything you get there, but it's a great deal. We have a great community. Again, $1 a month gets you ad-free shows, and anything beyond that gets you tons of bonus stuff.
And I'll just jump in there to say, as a Patreon of your fantastic show, you should do it, guys. Just do. If you like the Ghost Story Guys, you're going to like that more, I think. Because it's like the two of them, but undressed. I'll take that back. They're not naked, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I was going to say, no one wants that. At least not me. That's a
$200 level.
I'd be the kind of stripper where I start off in the G-string and then they give me money to put my clothes back on.
Fair play, yeah. As would I.
All right. So, yeah, we're just going to skip straight to the end. I'm not going to worry too much about most of the outro stuff because this is an unusual episode of Ghost Story Guys. But I will say, if you want to get in touch, you can send us an email, ghoststoryguys@gmail.com. If you got a story you want us to read out on the show, we will certainly do our best to get it on air. We're also on Twitter and Facebook as Ghost Story Guys. We're on Reddit as r/Ghost Story Guys podcast. And we're on Instagram as the Ghost Story Guys. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram as Largely the Truth. If you want to pick up some merch, t-shirts, stickers, things like that, head over to our website, ghoststoryguys.com. I just put up a brand new kind of neon skull design that I made in my spare time, and it's pretty sweet. So you can find that there, stickers, magnets, all that good stuff. And again, ghoststoryguys.com is where to go for that. That'll link you to our TeePublic, Redbubble, and Big Cartel stores. Our theme song, Radio, Into the Darkness We Go, is composed and performed by Peter Kursov of Podzontommusic. You can find more from him at nightharvestrecordings.com or by searching for Podzontommusic wherever you get your tunes. Our story's theme is The Future Belongs to Them Now by Hexxagram. Find more from them by searching for Hexxagram wherever you get your music. And remember, that's Hexxagram with 2 X's, not 3. I guess that's going to do it. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another show, and until then, into the darkness we go.